There are certain questions I return to again and again, not because I expect an answer, but because sitting with them feels like its own kind of answer. What's beyond the edge of what we can observe? What's happening inside a black hole in that place where the rules of the universe seem to give up? What happens after we die? Are we the only ones out here turning these same questions over in the dark? I think I love these questions precisely because they ask everything of my imagination and give nothing back. They don't resolve, they don't close, they just keep opening, wider each time I look at them. Someone very important to me once told me she doesn't let her mind wander toward those kinds of questions. She simply doesn't puzzle over them. And I understood what she meant. There's a peace in leaving certain doors shut, but some part of me still wishes I could walk through one of them just once and see what's on the other side. Then another part of me pushes back. If I actually got the answer, if the universe handed it over, plainly, completely, would I even want it? I wonder what it would do to a person to know everything they've ever wondered about. Would the wondering itself be the thing worth keeping? Because once a question is answered, it stops being a question. It becomes a fact, sitting there, finished. And I'm not sure facts hold the same kind of company that questions do. There are smaller mysteries, too, ones closer to the ground, places on this earth where something happened and the truth simply vanished, worn away by time, or buried, or never written down in the first place. Not everything unknown is unknowable because it's too vast. Some things are unknown because the moment for knowing them has already passed. My mind keeps wandering into the practical corners of this, too. Could we ever pause the aging process? Could we cure the diseases that still don't have a name for their cure? And then I remember, some of them already do. Some of the reality we once considered unshakable mystery has already been cracked open. And what do we do with that? We didn't always celebrate it. Sometimes the truth we uncovered was harder to carry than the not knowing ever was. That's the part I keep circling back to. Curiosity is such a natural pull in us, maybe the most natural one there is. Of course, we'd want to pull back every curtain, chase down every hidden thing, and drag it into the light. But I wonder if there's a cost hidden inside that instinct. If we knew everything, every hidden motive, every private thought, every answer to every mystery, would there be anything left of us that stayed ours? Privacy might be the first thing to go, and after that, maybe something more essential. So I sit here with the questions instead of the answers, not out of laziness and not because I've given up on wanting to know. I think I keep them close because they remind me that not knowing is its own kind of space, one where imagination still has room to move, where wonder hasn't been replaced by certainty. Maybe that's the trade we're always making, quietly, without noticing. Every truth we uncover closes a door somewhere else. And maybe the wisdom isn't in choosing between curiosity and restraint, but in learning which doors are worth opening and which ones are better left for the imagination to keep guessing at. I don't think that makes the not knowing any easier to sit with. I still find myself reaching for answers I'll probably never get. But there's something in the reaching itself that feels worth protecting, a kind of aliveness that certainty might quietly take away.
I keep thinking about the way she said it. Not defensive, not dismissive, just calm. She can't puzzle her mind over those kinds of questions. At first, I heard that as a kind of limit, like a door she'd chosen not to open. But the more I sit with it, the more it sounds like something else entirely. It sounds like protection. You've probably met someone like this too, someone who hears a question about black holes or what happens after we die and just shrugs, genuinely unbothered, not because they lack imagination, but because they've decided somewhere along the way that some rooms in the mind don't need to be furnished. There's a kind of peace in that, If you never open the question, you never have to carry the weight of an answer you can't do anything with. You get to keep your attention on the parts of life that respond to your effort. Dinner, deadlines, the people in front of you, questions that resolve instead of ones that just keep circling. We tend to treat that kind of person as incurious, like something in them is missing, but I don't think that's fair anymore. I think there's a discipline in choosing where your mind spends its hours. Wondering about the edge of the universe doesn't pay the bills, or raise the kids, or show up for a friend who needs you. Maybe choosing not to wonder is its own form of presence, a way of staying rooted in what's actually in front of you. Still, and notice something when I imagine living that way myself. A kind of restlessness would build in me if I closed those doors permanently. The unanswerable questions aren't a burden to me so much as they are a room I like to visit, even knowing I'll leave empty-handed. Maybe that's the real difference between us, her and me. It's not that she's closed off and I'm open, it's that we're protecting different things. She protects her peace by not asking. I protect something else, some sense of aliveness by asking anyway. Neither one of us is more right. We're just built to spend our attention differently, and I think that's allowed. What strikes me most is how much energy it must take to hold a question open with no hope of an answer. You carry it around, you turn it over, and it never gets lighter. Choosing to set that down isn't avoidance. It might just be wisdom, knowing which weights are worth carrying and which ones aren't. I used to think curiosity was always the higher path, that wondering more meant living more fully, but comfort with not knowing takes its own kind of courage too. It means making peace with a universe that won't always explain itself to you, and choosing to live well inside that uncertainty instead of straining against it. Maybe the healthiest version of any of us holds both, a little bit of her calm, willing to let some questions simply exist without an answer, and a little bit of the version of me that still can't help chasing them into the dark. Not as opposites, but as two ways of making peace with the same unknowable world. I think about how differently we'd each spend a quiet evening. She'd read something practical, or call a friend, or simply enjoy the silence without needing to fill it with anything larger. I'd end up back at the same handful of questions, turning them over like stones I've already picked up 100 times, half expecting to find something new underneath. Neither evening is wasted. They're just built around different needs. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in her calm. You don't have to solve everything to live a full life. You don't even have to want to. Some people find their meaning in the mystery itself, and others find it in simply letting the mystery be unbothered and turning their attention toward what's warm and near and real. I used to think one of those approaches was braver than the other. Now I'm not so sure that bravery is even the right measure. It might just be a matter of where each of us finds our footing and learning to trust that footing instead of questioning it.
There's a particular moment I find myself curious about. The exact instant a question stops being a question. Not the search for the answer, not the years of not knowing, but the specific second when someone finally has it. When the thing that was mystery a moment ago becomes fact. I wonder what that transition actually feels like from the inside. You'd think it would feel like triumph, pure and uncomplicated, and for a moment maybe it does, but I imagine there's also a strange kind of silence that follows right behind it, a quiet you didn't expect. The question gave you somewhere to point your energy for years, maybe decades, and now it's just answered, filed away, done. We tend to picture discovery as a straight line toward relief, like solving something removes weight from the world. Sometimes it does. A disease gets a cure and suffering genuinely lifts, and there's nothing complicated about that kind of good news. But other truths don't work that way. They land, and instead of relief, they bring a different kind of weight, one made of implications you weren't ready to hold. I think about how a single answered mystery can quietly rearrange everything around it. You solve one thing and suddenly 10 other things you assumed were separate turn out to be connected to it. The moment of arrival isn't clean. It's more like pulling one thread and watching the whole fabric shift in ways you didn't predict.
There's also the matter of what fills the space the question used to occupy. For as long as something stays unknown, it holds a kind of open territory in the mind, a place imagination is still allowed to wander. The moment truth arrives, that territory closes. It gets replaced with something fixed, something you can no longer reshape by wondering. And I think that's part of why some discoveries feel bittersweet even when they're good news. Something you could still imagine your way into is suddenly just one thing, permanently. We don't talk enough about how disorienting that can be. A civilization spends generations wondering about something, building stories and theories and half-answers around it, and then one day it's simply known. The wondering, all that collective imagination, has nowhere left to go. It has to find a new question to attach itself to because the old one has closed its doors for good. I don't think this means we should stop chasing answers. Truth is still worth having, even the uncomfortable kind, even the kind that costs us the mystery we'd grown attached to. But I think it helps to expect that arrival, when it finally comes, might not feel the way we imagined it would. It might feel less like fireworks and more like a held breath finally releasing, followed by a strange quiet you weren't prepared for. Maybe that's the real cost of every truth we uncover. Not that it's wrong to know, but that knowing changes the shape of the room we've been living in. And we have to learn how to stand in that new shape, question by question, discovery by discovery, for as long as we keep choosing to look. I think of the scientist who spends 30 years chasing a single proof, and the strange flatness some of them describe once it's finally done. Not because the work didn't matter, but because the searching had become part of their identity. Who are you once the thing you've spent your life circling is finally caught? That's not a reason to stop searching. It's just worth naming honestly, instead of pretending every discovery arrives wrapped in nothing but celebration. You see it on a smaller scale, too, in ordinary life. The answer to a question you've carried for years about a relationship, a decision, a person who's gone, finally arrives, and it doesn't feel like closing a chapter so much as grief for the not knowing you'd gotten used to living inside. Maybe that's the part no one warns you about. Truth doesn't just fill an empty space. It removes a companion you didn't realize you'd been keeping. Still, I'd rather stand in that new, rearranged room than avoid it out of fear of what it might cost me. I think most of us would, if we're honest. We just don't talk enough about the quiet that follows the answer, the part that comes after the applause has faded and you're left alone with what you now know for certain.
Somewhere in the history of every disease we've cured, there's a specific year, sometimes a specific week, when suffering that used to be a given simply stopped being one. I think about that more than I probably should. A disease that took lives without asking permission, and then one day, it just didn't anymore. That has to be one of the most quietly enormous things a species can do to its own timeline. You'd expect that kind of answer to arrive as pure celebration, and for a while it does. Relief spreads fast. But underneath it, something else tends to surface too. Something people rarely mention out loud. Once a threat like that disappears, we're left facing whatever it had been distracting us from. Grief that had somewhere to go now has nowhere to go. Anger that had a target now has none. The answer solves the problem it was aimed at, but it doesn't solve everything the problem had been standing in front of. We like to imagine that solving something clears the table completely. In practice, it usually just rearranges what's left on it. A cure removes one kind of suffering and quietly hands us a new question. What do we do with the years we get back? Extra time isn't automatically meaningful just because it exists. Sometimes it just sits there, waiting for us to figure out what to fill it with. There's a heavier version of this too. Some truths we've uncovered about the world didn't just relieve suffering, they reorganized what we understood about ourselves. learning something definitive about our place in the universe, or about how a mind actually works, or about what's really driving a behavior we thought was simple, can feel less like an answer and more like a demotion. The mystery protected a certain story we liked telling about ourselves. The truth doesn't always ask permission before replacing it. I think that's why some solved mysteries get remembered fondly and others get quietly resisted, even resented, by the very people who benefit from them. Relief and disorientation aren't opposites arriving at different times. They tend to show up together, tangled into the same moment, and we have to sort out which one we're actually feeling before we can even respond honestly to what's happened. We rarely give ourselves permission to hold both. Culturally, we're expected to just be grateful once something is cured, once something is finally known. Gratitude is real, and it should be there. But so is the disorientation, and pretending it isn't makes it harder to actually process what just changed. You can be relieved that the mystery is gone and still grieve what it used to mean to not know. Both things can be true in the same breath. Maybe the real weight of an answer isn't the fact itself. It's everything the fact quietly asks us to rebuild around it. Our sense of what's still uncertain, what still deserves our worry, what we're allowed to stop carrying now that it's finally been carried for us. I think that's worth sitting with honestly, instead of rushing straight to relief the moment a mystery finally gets solved. The weight doesn't disappear. It just changes shape, and we're the ones left figuring out how to hold it. I keep thinking about the families who spent generations bracing for something, an illness that ran through their bloodline, a threat they planned their whole lives around avoiding, and then, one discovery later, the bracing is no longer necessary. You'd think that would feel like nothing but freedom, but bracing becomes a posture over enough time, almost a kind of identity. Learning you can finally stand up straight takes its own adjustment, its own quiet relearning of who you are, without the weight you'd built your whole life around carrying. There's something almost humbling in realizing that answers don't arrive clean. They arrive tangled into everything that came before them, into the years spent not knowing, into the coping mechanisms we built around the uncertainty itself. Solving the mystery doesn't erase those years. It just changes what they were for. Maybe that's the real lesson underneath all of this. We ask for answers because we think they'll simplify us, more often than just ask us to become something a little more complicated instead. Someone who carries both the relief and the reckoning at the very same time.
I've started to wonder if we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Not what's the answer, but what is it in us that keeps reaching for one in the first place? Because if you watch a child, before they've learned to expect answers, before the world has taught them that some questions are pointless to ask, what you see isn't someone chasing facts. You see someone who's simply completely alive to not knowing. You can trace that same pull through everything we've ever built. Every telescope, every expedition, every late night spent staring at a ceiling turning something over. None of it started with an answer already in hand. It started with a kind of itch, an unwillingness to leave a gap alone. I think that itch might be closer to who we actually are than any of the answers it eventually produces. We tend to measure curiosity by its output, by what it discovers, cures, invents. But maybe that's backwards. Maybe curiosity isn't a tool we use to get somewhere. Maybe it's closer to a condition we're simply born into. The way breathing is a condition, something that happens whether or not it leads anywhere useful. I notice this most clearly in the moments when curiosity has nothing practical to gain from being followed. Standing outside at night, looking up at something too far away to ever visit, too vast to ever fully picture, and still feeling pulled to look anyway. There's no reward waiting at the end of that. No cure, no fix, no closure, just the looking itself. And somehow that's enough to keep us doing it. You could almost call it useless in the strictest sense. And yet I don't think a single meaningful thing we've ever built came from anywhere else. The medicine, the art, the quiet insights people have about their own lives, all of it seems to trace back to someone who couldn't leave a question alone long before they had any idea what answering it might actually cost or give them. We talk about answers like they're the whole point, like curiosity is just a means to an end that eventually gets discarded once it's served its purpose. But I don't think curiosity retires once a question gets solved. It just turns toward the next open space, the next gap it hasn't filled yet. That restlessness doesn't feel like a flaw to me anymore. It feels closer to a kind of engine, quietly running underneath everything else we do. Maybe that's the part worth protecting, more than any specific answer we're chasing. Not the destination, but the particular aliveness that shows up the moment we admit there's something we don't understand yet. If we ever lost that, if every question got answered and nothing was left wondering about, I don't think we'd feel complete. I think we'd feel strangely empty, like an engine idling with nowhere left to go. So maybe the real evidence of what we're built for isn't in what we've figured out. It's in the fact that we keep looking anyway, long after looking has stopped being necessary, simply because something in us was never built to stop. Think about the questions you've carried since childhood, the ones that never resolved and never really needed to. They didn't stop mattering just because they never got answered. If anything, they became part of the furniture of who you are, quietly shaping the way you see everything else. We don't often give ourselves credit for that. We treat unanswered curiosity like unfinished business, when really it might just be a permanent feature of being someone who's paying attention. Think about what it would mean to actually reach the end of wondering, to run out of things left to be curious about. It sounds peaceful on paper, but I suspect it would feel closer to a kind of quiet grief. Wonder isn't just how we solve problems, it's how we stay tethered to the world, how we keep noticing it instead of going numb to it. Maybe that's why the questions in the opening thought never bothered me the way they seem to bother some people. Not knowing what's beyond the observable universe doesn't feel like a failure to me. It feels like proof that there's still somewhere left for my attention to go, still something in me that hasn't gone quiet.
There's a version of total knowledge that sounds appealing on the surface. Every mystery solved, every hidden thing brought into the light. But somewhere inside that fantasy is a detail I don't think we examine closely enough. If everything became knowable, that wouldn't just apply to black holes and ancient ruins, it would apply to us too. Every private thought, every unspoken motive, every quiet decision made behind a closed door, all of it would stop being ours to keep. You don't usually think about privacy as a form of protection until you imagine it gone. It's easy to treat it like secrecy, like something only necessary when you have something to hide. But most of what privacy actually shields isn't shameful at all. It's simply unfinished. Thoughts you're still working out, feelings you haven't named yet, even to yourself. Versions of you that exist for a moment and then quietly evolve into something else before anyone else ever has to witness them. I think that's the part that would actually break if we lost it. Not our secrets, but our ability to be unfinished in front of other people. Right now, you get to try a thought on privately before deciding whether it deserves to be spoken out loud. You get to be uncertain, contradictory, even wrong in the quiet space nobody else can access. Take that space away, and every half-formed thought becomes permanent the instant it appears. We already get a small preview of this in how exposed modern life can feel. A private conversation becomes public. An old post resurfaces years later, stripped of the context it was written in. And you can feel in those moments how disorienting it is to have something meant for one version of yourself land in front of a version of you that's already changed. Now imagine that happening constantly with everything all the time. There's something almost unbearable about a world with no unseen corners left in it. Not because we'd have terrible things to hide, most of us don't, but because being fully seen at every moment doesn't leave room for becoming. Growth depends on trial and error happening somewhere quiet first. Take away the quiet, and you take away the room people need to fail privately before they succeed publicly. I wonder, too, about what it would do to trust. Right now, when someone chooses to share something with you, it means something, precisely because they could have kept it hidden. If nothing could ever be hidden, sharing wouldn't be a gift anymore. It would just be inevitable, drained of the meaning that comes from someone deciding on their own that you were worth letting in. Maybe that's what privacy really protects underneath it all. Not information, but the freedom to keep becoming someone before the world decides who you already are. And maybe that's worth remembering the next time total knowledge sounds like something worth wanting without limits. That a world with nothing left unknown might also be a world with nothing left to grow into. We treat closed doors as suspicious sometimes, as if anything kept private must be hiding something worse than it is. But some of the most important parts of a life happened exactly because a door was closed. A decision gets made in private before it's announced. A grief gets processed quietly before anyone else has to see it fully formed. A relationship finds its footing away from an audience before it's ready to withstand one. None of that is deception. It's simply how anything fragile gets strong enough to survive being seen. I think about what it would mean to raise a child in a world with no privacy left at all. No room to try on an identical quietly, fail at it, discard it, and try another one without the failure following them forever. Most of who any of us became started as an experiment nobody else was watching. Remove that, and I wonder how much slower, how much more cautious every act of becoming would turn out to be. So when I imagined that fantasy of total knowledge again, everything finally answered, nothing left hidden, I don't feel the relief I expected to feel. I feel something closer to claustrophobia. A world with no unseen corners isn't a world with more truth in it. It's a world with less room left to change. We treat closed doors sometimes as suspicious, as if anything kept private must be hiding something worse than it is. But some of the most important parts of a life happen exactly because a door was closed. A decision gets made in private before it's announced. A grief gets processed quietly before anyone else has to see it fully formed. A relationship finds its footing away from an audience before it's ready to withstand one. None of that is deception. It's simply how anything fragile gets strong enough to survive being seen. I think about what it would mean to raise a child in a world with no privacy left at all, no room to try on an identity quietly, fail at it, discard it, and try another one without the failure following them forever. Most of who any of us became started as an experiment nobody else was watching. Remove that, and I wondered how much slower, how much more cautious every act of becoming would turn out to be. So when I imagined that fantasy of total knowledge again, everything finally answered, nothing left hidden, I don't feel the relief I expected to feel. I feel something closer to claustrophobia. A world with no unseen corners isn't a world with more truth in it. It's a world with less room left to change.
Every so often, I try to actually picture the edge of the observable universe, and every time my mind just slides off it. Not because I lack the will to imagine it, but because there isn't a shape for it to land on. It's not a wall. It's not a horizon in the way we understand horizons, something you could theoretically walk toward. It's simply the furthest point light has had time to reach us from since everything began. Past that, there could be more of the same, or something we don't have a name for yet, or nothing that resembles space at all. You can feel your mind physically strained against a boundary like that. It's built to picture things, rooms, distances, faces, and it reaches for something to picture here too, but there's nothing solid to reach for. Just the honest, uncomfortable admission that our instruments, our imaginations, even our language all run out of road at roughly the same place. Black holes do something similar to me from a different angle. It's not that they're too far away to picture, it's that the rules themselves seem to stop applying once you get close enough.
Time behaves differently, space folds in on itself. Whatever happens past a certain point isn't hidden from us the way a locked room is hidden. It's hidden the way a color outside the visible spectrum is hidden, not concealed, just genuinely outside the range of what we're built to perceive. I think that's the real difference between an unsolved mystery and an unreachable one. A mystery invites you in, tempts you with a promise that if you look hard enough, you might eventually understand it. But some questions aren't locked doors waiting for the right key. They're simply beyond the architecture of the mind trying to open them, no matter how long it keeps trying. We don't like admitting that. It feels like giving up, like a failure of nerve or imagination. But I've started to think there's something almost humbling, in the right way, about accepting a limit like that. It puts you in proper scale next to something enormous instead of pretending you're capable of holding it all inside. A mind that knows where its edges are isn't a weaker mind. It might just be an honest one. There's a strange comfort hiding inside that honesty, too. If some things really are beyond us, permanently, then the not knowing isn't a personal failure. It's just the shape of being a small, temporary consciousness inside something vastly larger than itself. You're not failing to understand the edge of the universe. You're simply standing exactly where a being like you is supposed to stand, looking out at something too big to be pulled inside a single mind. Maybe that's why I keep returning to these questions, even though I know they'll never resolve. Not to solve them, but to feel every so often how small and specific my own thinking actually is against something that has no edges I could ever reach. There's something clarifying in that strange comfort, a kind of quiet that only shows up once you stop demanding the universe make sense of itself on your terms. I notice this same feeling on a much smaller scale, oddly enough, in ordinary moments. Standing at the edge of the ocean at night, unable to see where the water actually ends. Looking at a photograph of someone who died before you were born, aware there are things about their inner life you'll simply never access. These aren't cosmic mysteries, but they carry a smaller version of the same shrug the universe gives back when you ask it to explain itself. Some distances just aren't crossable, no matter how much you want to close them. We spend so much energy trying to make everything knowable, as if not knowing is always a temporary condition waiting to be fixed with enough time or technology. But I don't think every unknown is temporary. Some of it is architecture, built into the way reality is arranged, not a gap waiting to be filled, but a boundary that was always meant to stay a boundary. And once you accept that, the questions stop feeling like failures and start feeling more like company, something enormous and quiet you get to sit next to for exactly as long as you're here. Some mysteries aren't actually mysteries in the way we usually mean the word. They're not puzzles waiting for someone clever enough to solve them. They're just questions that arrive too late. Somewhere, at some point, the person who knew the answer died without telling anyone, or the evidence quietly degraded past the point of being readable, or the moment that would have explained everything simply passed, unremarkable, unrecorded, and gone. You don't usually notice time working this way while it's happening. It doesn't announce itself. There's no ceremony when the last person who remembers something finally forgets it, or when the only record of an event turns out to have been thrown away decades earlier by someone who had no idea what they were holding. The erasure is almost always quiet, almost always accidental, and by the time anyone realizes something's missing, there's no getting it back. We tend to lump these losses in with the grand cosmic unknowns, the edge of the universe, the inside of a black hole, but they're a completely different kind of unknowable. Those questions are unanswerable because reality itself refuses to hand over the answer. These ones are unanswerable simply because nobody thought to ask in time. That distinction matters to me. One is a limit built into existence. The other is closer to a missed appointment, a door that was open for a while and nobody happened to walk through it before it shut. I think about all the ordinary knowledge that's vanished this way. Not the dramatic kinds, just the small, specific kind. A grandmother's exact recipe, adjusted by feel instead of measurement, that nobody wrote down before she was gone.
A version of a story told slightly differently by the one person who actually lived through it, lost the moment they stopped being able to tell it. None of that will ever come back, and none of it was lost because it was unknowable. It was lost because time moved faster than anyone's attention did. There's a particular kind of grief in that, quieter than most, because you're not mourning something you had, you're mourning something you never got the chance to have, something that existed just long enough to matter and then closed before you arrived. You can't be nostalgic for a memory you never got to make. You can only sense its absence, a shape where something used to be without ever knowing exactly what it looked like. Maybe that's why some questions feel more haunting than others, not because they're bigger, but because they were, at some point, answerable. Someone once knew, something once existed to confirm it, and the window simply closed, the way windows always eventually do, whether or not anyone happened to be standing there when it did. I don't think there's a lesson here, exactly, not one that fixes anything, but maybe there's a smaller instinct worth keeping close because of it. Write it down. Ask the question while the person's still there to answer it. Not because everything can be preserved, most of it can't, but because some of these doors are only open for a little while and you don't always get a warning before they close for good. I think about how much of what any of us know about our own families is really just a handful of stories that happened to survive out of countless others that didn't. Whoever told the surviving stories, whatever reason they had for remembering those particular details and forgetting the rest, shaped what an entire family will ever know about where they came from. It's arbitrary in a way that's hard to sit with. Not the most important moments got kept, just the ones someone happened to mention before it was too late. There's something almost eerie about walking through a place, a house, a town, a stretch of land, and realizing it's full of things that happened and were never told to anyone. Moments that mattered enormously to someone once and now belong to no one. The place doesn't advertise what it's lost. It just sits there, ordinary, holding silence where a story used to be. Maybe part of paying attention, real attention, is remembering that everything around us is on the same clock. Nothing waits forever for us to notice it, and some of what we'll wish we'd asked is standing close enough to answer right now, if we just remember to ask before the window closes.
I started all of this with a handful of questions I knew I'd never get answered. The edge of the universe, the inside of a black hole, what happens after we die. And somewhere along the way, without really meaning to, I ended up circling something bigger than any single answer could have given me. I thought about the people who simply choose not to wonder about these things, and I stopped seeing that as a lack of curiosity. It's its own kind of peace, a way of staying rooted to what's actually in front of you instead of reaching for what isn't. And I thought about the strange quiet that follows an answer once it finally arrives, how relief and disorientation seem to show up together more often than we admit, tangled into the very same moment. I thought about cured diseases and solved mysteries, and how even the best answers ask something of us in return, a rebuilding of what we thought we understood about ourselves, about what's still worth carrying now that something else has finally been set down. And underneath all of it, I kept coming back to curiosity itself, not as a means to an end, but as something closer to a condition we're born into. Maybe the wondering was never really about the destination. Maybe it was the engine the whole time, quietly running beneath everything we've ever built. I thought about privacy too, about what it would actually mean to have nothing left unknown, not just about the universe, but about each other. And I realized what we'd lose wouldn't be secrets. It would be the room to keep becoming someone before the world decided who we already were. Some things need to stay unseen for a while, not because they're shameful, but because they're still growing into whatever they're going to be. Then there was the edge of it all, the actual boundary of what a mind like mine can hold. Standing at the furthest reach of the observable universe, or near whatever happens inside a black hole, and feeling my own thinking go quiet against something too large to fit inside it. That kind of not knowing stopped feeling like failure somewhere along the way. It started feeling like scale, like finally standing where something my size is supposed to stand. And then the smaller griefs,
the ones time takes instead of the universe. A story never asked for in time. A version of someone that existed once and is gone now, taking whatever it knew along with it. Not unknowable in the cosmic sense, just unasked. A door that was open and quietly closed before anyone noticed it was closing. If there's a thread running through all of it, I think it's this. Not knowing isn't always a problem waiting to be solved. Sometimes it's the room where a life actually happens, where wonder still has somewhere to go, where privacy still has something left to protect, where you're still allowed to become someone instead of already being someone fixed and finished. The mysteries I started with are still mysteries. I don't expect that to change, and somewhere in that, I think I've made a kind of peace with it. I don't say any of this because I've stopped wanting answers. I still catch myself looking up some nights, still turning the same handful of questions over the way you'd turn a stone you've already picked up 100 times. But I've stopped needing the turning to lead anywhere. The questions themselves have become a kind of company, something steady I get to keep coming back to, whether or not they ever open. And maybe that's the actual shift. Not an answer arriving, but learning to live comfortably next to everything that never will. So maybe the real question isn't what's outside the observable universe, or what's inside a black hole, or what happens after we die. Maybe it's simpler than that, and closer to home. Which of your own questions have you been rushing to answer, and which ones might actually be asking you to sit with them a little longer instead?